Okay, good evening.
Sir.
Okay, so how many are here today? Okay, 21. Fully others will be joining while we are going on. Yeah, so automobile engines and components. This is, I think, our fifth lecture. So, with this session, this lecture, I'm actually going to finish the engine section. But as you know, we didn't actually go through whole assembling and disassembling process like one step by step. Uh, as you know, it doesn't make any sense to do that since this is like a fully practical module. So once you come back to the university, we will be going through. Once you come back to the faculty, we will be actually starting from that point onward. Okay. Up to today in this automotive engines section, we have discussed already removing the engine, dismantling, inspecting of the engine, parameter testing, and engine overhauling sections. So we have completed up to there, and I have given you like a very brief introduction into the engine overhauling, and I actually gave you an assignment based on engine overhauling. I hope you all got your groupings and you all have started your works. So now today we will be discussing on reassembling section of the engine. So just not much of things to discuss here again. As I told you earlier, assembling and disassembling that part, even the inspection part, it's better if I can do it to you like practical sense. So this is with this because of the pandemic situation we are doing like this way, but very soon we will be actually moving back to the university. Hopefully, we'll be back moving back to the university and continue assembling and disassembling works. Okay, so as usual, safety first. Follow that. So I'm not going to go through the details again. So yeah. So when it comes to engine assembly, I know that you have already done this assembling and this assembling process few times or at least once during your school, right? During your school, so you have some idea about this, so you have seen some things, but I'm just actually trying to give you more details into this section. So in more details in the sense, more like a technical details and more related to the way it's actually being doing in a workshop, not like a teaching situation. It's like a actual how it's actually works sort of thing, right? Okay, so assembling an engine compared to this assembly part, when assembling, this is actually very important that uh, very important process, and it's more or less like a surgery, because even in a surgery you have to wear gloves and you can't take any debris or anything inside. Similarly for engine work also, you can't do any of these things. You have to be very clean around the engine. You have to make sure that nothing goes inside the engine unless it actually belongs inside the engine. So wearing clean gloves and keeping everything clean is very important. In addition to that, usually in ideal case, in order to assemble engines, for assembling the engines, especially for assembling engine, separate room has to be used, which are known as engine rooms. Usually, these are supposed to be uh, air conditioned and sealed, right? They're supposed to be air conditioned and sealed to make sure that nothing goes inside the engine. In a ideal situation, this is for ideal situation, but in most cases, it's not the situation. In most cases, it's not like that. We usually build and disassemble the engine in a normal shed, even sometimes on the floor. Even in our workshop, we actually do not follow this. Uh, Basically, for us, for as a university, maintaining a complete airtight room for maintaining or assembling and disassembling, just assembling and disassembling engines is a expensive task. So that's why we are not actually doing it unless, but we still do have facilities to So if we need it, we actually have a separate laboratory, or we have enough space to clear and do it for in an air conditioned or sealed environment. And yeah, so as usual, everything has to be cleaned before assembly. And when assembling any engine assembler or any engine mechanic, what he does is before start assembling, he will actually make sure that he got all the components. He make everything line up in a correct way, so he can actually keep working on the engine. The reason for that is there are two reasons for that. One reason is to reduce the amount of to time you are spending on an open engine, because you have already cleaned it, so you're not supposed to complete the assembly. And the second reason is so you won't miss anything, right? Second reason is you won't miss anything. For example, if you missed a journal bearing, for example, something like the one actually shown there, for some reason, if you missed a journal bearing, that means even after you started, you will actually hearing a noise. So then you have to come back. So you have to disassemble everything back. So to avoid that, so to avoid these sort of complexities beforehand, everything has to be prepared and kept in a well organized manner. So you know that everything is there, right? So you know everything is there. So in assembling, one of the most important steps is lubricating well, right? Lubricating very well is very important part. So using assembly grease is the best solution for this. So at the moment, if you go to any workshop, what we does is we just put engine oil, a little bit of engine oil, or we rub some engine oil on these components, the metal components that could actually that could actually that could actually end up rubbing each others. To avoid that, we usually put engine oil. But the thing we have to remember is engine, when the engine is actually working, all of these surfaces are actually getting pressurized engine oil, right? It's actually getting pressurized engine oil. So uh, for until engine is actually uh, until the engine start to build oil pressure, until then, in order to support for these bearings and any other contacting surfaces, we can actually use assembly lube or assembly grease, also known as assembly grease. So this is actually available in most of the shops. I'm not exactly sure how much available in Sri Lanka, but it's possible to buy it in Sri Lanka also. The reason it's not available, it's not widely available, the reason it's not widely available in Sri Lanka is most people are not actually using it, right? But it's actually very good practice to use it, especially considering as soon as the engine start to fire up, engine the components like especially the components like crankshaft is actually getting a lot of force, and the engine oil will not be actually delivering all the places at the same time. For example, engine oil will be actually reaching to the crankshaft before it goes to the camshaft, but camshaft will be rotating twice the speed of the crankshaft. So because of that, to avoid this wear and tear, we actually should use assembly lube as much as possible. And it's actually providing this initial lubrication until the engine lubrication system takes over. And this grease is actually specifically made for this particular purpose. So one advantage of using this sort of lube is it's actually with the engine oil. When the engine oil pressure is building up, this particular lubrication method that we use, assembly grease, that will actually automatically dissolve in the engine in the with the engine oil itself without creating further damage. But using any other grease types is not actually recommended. They are not recommended. You should always use assembly lubrication grease. uh, and one more very important part is whenever you are assembling a engine, any engine. So basically, engine assembling is a very simple process as long as you know what to do, right? As long as you know what to do, as long as you know what are the components, it's not a big deal. It's a simple process. But unfortunately, uh, all the engines are not actually exactly same. They have small differences. So in order to properly assemble, right, in order to properly assemble and properly rebuild the engine up to the OEM specifications or the manufacturer's specifications, you actually need the instructions from the manufacturer. So in order to do that, you actually need to use a workshop guide. So I'm not actually going to go through all the details about engine assembly, which part has to put first, which of part has to go second, something like that. For any automobile engine, any car or any bike or something, it's always easier to start from the pistons. You put the pistons first, then the crankshaft, then add the assemble the crankshaft and the piston, or you can just start from the piston, start from the crankshaft, then put the pistons. Both ways are okay, so it's up to you, but I prefer the first way. I actually told you. So these processes are there, uh, but I'm not actually going to go through one by one. I hope I actually expect that you already, since you already have done this, you have a certain idea. And just to give you a little bit more help, I have actually included three links here, which are explaining assembling and disassembling of engines properly. So there's one link. I'm exactly not. I think third link. Third link is a very good ad assembly process, which explains each and every step. And it's a 4G63 engine, which is actually one of the most common engines available in the Mitsubishi manufactured by Mitsubishi company. So, as I told you earlier, guide, or using use manufacturer's workshop guidelines, or use workshop manuals as much as possible. Yeah, so after assembling, the first thing you, after assembling everything, after checking that everything is okay, first thing you will be actually doing is starting the engine, right? So, first time starting is a somewhat daunting task, because at that time engine is not exactly getting any lubrication, right? It's not getting any lubrication. It's not actually advisable to start right away any engine. So one good solution for this is, what you can do is you can switch off the ignition. So you can switch off the ignition but still crank the engine. So we call it as a priming, right? So priming means we prime the uh, engine oil, so engine lubrication system. We prime the engine lubrication system, then only we fire the engine up. So if the engine was not ran for a long time, this is the best way to do it. So how do we do this is, so how do we do this is, uh, we remove either the fuel lines or ignition lines, right? If it's a diesel engine, we can just shut off the fuel. There's no switch or something to shut off the fuel. We have to actually remove the fuel lines. If it is a petrol engine, we can actually remove we can actually remove the ignition coil, right? We can actually remove the ignition coil, or we can remove the power up to the ignition system. So after doing so, if we start to crank the engine, then engine will actually start to rotate, right? Engine will start to rotate. But the advantage here is, at this particular situation, engine is actually not engine is actually, so piston is not actually rotating the crankshaft. but crankshaft is rotating the piston, right? So there's no highly pressurized air on top of there's no explosion happening inside the combustion chamber. So the forces actually acting on the crankshaft and camshaft and the other components is actually less. So there's less possibility of damaging. So in order to do this, it's always before first run, it's always better to start the engine or prime the engine. So actually, the last image, this one second, this bottom image. If you look at the bottom image, there are three. There's three images shown here. I'm not exactly sure whether you know what sort of so these sort of bearings, the type of bearing we used in most of the engine components, especially most of the engine components are actually known as hydrodynamic lubrication system. Right, hydrodynamic lubrication. So the oil pressure, this oil pressure is actually used to create a barrier, right? Create a barrier and act as a bearing between these two. So at when static situation, as you can see on the first image, the crankshaft, this is your crankshaft, this is your journal, right? This is your journal, this is your crankshaft, right? At that particular instant, engine is, when the engine is actually not running, the crankshaft is sitting in on top of the on top of the journal, right? On top of the journal here. So there's no oil in between the crankshaft and the journal. But when we rotate only, the fluid start to go inside. But the problem here is the force acting. So if we rotate the crankshaft is actually rotating freely while moving the piston, right? While moving the piston. But if we start the engine, if you start engine at once without doing any priming or something like that, then a force, the force from the combustion, right? The force from the combustion is acting on this crankshaft, right? So acting on the crankshaft without any fluid to lubricate, without any fluid to lubricate it, especially without the lubricate, without the oil pressure. So it's not advisable. So it's always better to actually prime the engine. For a typical vehicles such as our vehicles or our day-to-day vehicles, they don't actually have something called a priming system. So these are actually known as dry sump system. Sorry, wet sump system. Wet sump lubrication system does not have the capability of priming the engine before start. Right? They don't have priming system before start. But if you go to something like a dry sump full or lubrication system, in some level dry sump lubrication system, they comes with the inbuilt electric motor that can turn the whole whole lubrication pump or the complete lubrication pump in order to provide lubrication or high pressure oil up to all the components before starting the engine, right? Before starting the engine. This is this is very important for these sort of dry sump sort of engines, because uh, usually dry sump lubrication system is actually fit for the vehicles which are used for high performance applications, and their tolerances are very low. So in such cases, these sort of a small mistake could end up creating a bigger issue where all the components are 2-3 times the cost of a normal component that we are using in a normal day-to-day vehicle. And yeah, after doing the prime, we can actually start the engine for the first time. In order to know whether the priming is properly working, what we can do is we can keep the engine cranked until the oil pressure bulb goes off, until the oil pressure lights completely switched off, right? So in some cases, oil pressure light will not be actually completely switched off. It will not completely switch off even if you kept cranking for a few seconds. So in such case, around 10-15 second crank should be enough to fully pressurize the whole lubrication system. 10 to 15 seconds is more than enough to fully lubricate, almost completely uh, pressurize the system, right? But if you have like a oil pressure gauge, in such case it can actually goes, if it is more than 20 psi, then it's okay. Then it's okay, engine won't get any damages. Yeah, the question, what is the mean by priming the engine before starting? Yeah, I already told the answer. And why is it important for high performance engines such as race engines? I think I already gave the answer for that as well. Okay, so after starting for the first time, assume that we have completely done everything as we discussed earlier. Then what we should do? Then I think you might have heard this after doing the rebuild. We say engine has to be not has engine. We shouldn't run the engine hard. We have to run it very smoothly for few thousand kilometers. Right? There's some sayings like that. So so yes, there are something like said, there is a reason for that, right? So basically, idea of this is the main idea of this main process or main idea of this is after like around 1,000 kilometers, engine will, or the piston rings. This is mainly related to piston ring. Uh, so it allows the engine to so how can I? Yeah. So when engine is actually running, when an engine is actually running, right, or when the engine is actually rebuilding, we'll start from there. So when the engine is actually rebuilding, I told you that we are doing some machining processes. We are doing some machining processes, and one of these machining processes is honing, right? During the honing process, it's actually cutting a small sort of a groove on the uh, on the cylinder itself to keep or retain the engine oil, right? Or retain the engine oil layer on the cylinder wall. Okay, so even though this it's actually done that, the exact amount necessary or the exact cylinder wall diameter, so exact cylinder wall roughness is not matched by this machining process alone, right? It's not matched by the machining process alone. In order to match that, it has to be heated up to the operating conditions and run for certain amount of time. While it is doing, when the engine is a piston moving up and down, it's actually removing a very thin microscopic amount of material.
ඉවරද එන්ජින් වෙද්දීමේ ක්‍රියාපටිපාටි යන new cylinder, broken in cylinder, piston rings.
Yeah, whose mic is there? Yeah. So in order to do this only, we in order to achieve this roughness or actually smoothness on the engine cylinder wall, only we are actually running the engine at a constant low rpm without having higher loads, because and if we add higher loads in such case, because of the higher compression and higher speeds the piston is actually achieving, it's tend to twist and slap the piston. To avoid all of these issues and to keep the engine temperature at the constant level, uh, engine is driven at a lower rpm for a certain amount of mileage. But there are some controversy around this topic, main reason being this process was actually introduced long time ago, like very long time ago. Those days machining processes and those days manufacturing technology and material technology were very limited, but nowadays it's actually very advanced, right? Very advanced. So in most cases nowadays this is almost unnecessary. So that 1,000 kilometers, 3,000 kilometers is not absolutely necessary for an engine nowadays. There are so many so many things about, so many discussions going about, right? There are so many discussions going about this, so I'm not exactly sure which answer to give. So I don't know whether, I can't directly say this should not be done, or I can't say this has to be done. But doing it would not actually harm anything, so I guess best way is to do it. But at the moment there's no such thing as correct braking procedure, or what is the correct braking procedure. But most manufacturers, for each vehicle they actually, or each engine they give like a small braking process. If you can remember, if you buy a brand new vehicle, they say that you have to drive up around 1,000 kilometers, 1,000 kilometers, less than this much of RPM all times, and after that bring the vehicle to us, then we will be servicing it. That's what the first three, or uh, one or two services are free, something like that. So one of the reasons for this giving first service free is a part of this breaking in procedure. So there's a lot of things about this breaking in procedure. So uh, I actually suggest you, I actually highly suggest you to go and look into this. There's so many details. Some person is saying this is correct, some are saying this is wrong, but I say it wouldn't harm it if you do it. So better do it, right? Better do it. There are some results. There's actually good results related to it, but unfortunately it's not exactly, it's not 100% necessary to do it with the new material technology and the machining tolerances that we are actually working nowadays. This is almost unnecessary in some higher end manufacturers. In higher end manufacturers, like some manufacturers like Mercedes Benz, BMW, they actually do not recommend you to break the vehicle. As soon as you buy it, you can actually run it. The one main reason for this is after engine is actually built, assembled, each and every engine actually goes through a thorough testing procedure. It's not just starting and running. Okay, this is now start. Okay, it's cranking and start running. Okay, that's good enough to put into your vehicle. It's not like nowadays, because of the high quality control aspects in the manufacturing industry. Nowadays, each and every engine has to actually go through a whole dyno process, right? Whole dyno process. So that these dyno processes actually contain the testing of the engine, how much temperature is it achieving, what sort of stress levels the engines are getting, how is the engine combustion pressure inside the engine, what about the all sort of things in addition to that. And for doing this, it's actually running for 15 something minutes continuously at a higher loads. So usually they run at high load. So because of that, this braking engine braking process is not that much necessary for a brand new vehicle. But for an engine actually rebuild, it's always advisable to use it. Okay, next part is so now we rebuild the engine and somehow we assemble the engine. Then we broke the engine in, or we breaking the engine. Now next part is discussion about this workshop manual. So the purpose of the workshop manual and why we need a workshop manual. So workshop manuals are actually a must-have resource in any workshop, but unfortunately, most of the workshop does not have it. The workshop manual for most of the workshop is the technician itself, which is unfortunately is raw. Uh, as I told you there earlier, even though the general guidelines of building or assembling or disassembling engines Same, there are specific instructions related to specific components such as clearances, torque values, and anything, any other things such as these things. So, in order to understand, in order to know about this, you actually have to have a workshop manual. So, workshop manuals are not actually a freely available resource. So, uh, for example, very simple example, usually uh, someone answer me, usually what is the clearance value for a intake valve and an exhaust valve for a petrol engine? What are the clearance value for intake valve and the exhaust valve? Somebody will answer, otherwise I will ask the name. We call names actually. Aruttatta?
I don't know about it, sir.
You don't know, you done this one last semester.
Sir,
This was in your last semester, this was in your A level practical test also.
yes, sir, but I can't remember the correct value.
So how can you become 0.8 inches in England? Okay, someone sent a massive. How much is an inch? Came in the yes. Came in the.
Yes, sir.
So how much is an inch in millimeters?
Sorry, the millimeters. Millimeters, sir. Should be millimeters.
How many millimeters? Inch is a 25 millimeters.
Should not
25.
inches the millimeters, not inches the millimeters. Should be millimeters.
Yeah, 25.4. Yes. So in such case, if it is 25.4, how much is 0.8 inches mean? That's a lot. So it's not 0.8 inches. If I am correct, it should be 0.35 millimeters and 0.3 or 0.25 millimeters, something like that for intake. That's the usual values. But it's not the exact values. Those are not the exact value. When 0.8, 0.6 clearance is for not for um, 0. Inches. Please don't use inches. We usually use SI units, so try to use SI units as much as possible. Even though most of the videos and everything, even I am sharing, are actually having inches and metric units. Mostly having metric units, but yeah, okay. So let's assume, okay, for the this task we say this is 0.35. 0.35 is the exhaust valve clearance, 0.35 millimeters. But it's 0.35 millimeter. That specific value is for that particular valve, right? That particular valve. But if you use it, if you go for a vehicle such as um, what's the vehicle? Yeah, we go for 4AG or something like a higher compression, high RPM engines. So in such engine, the valves actually made of titanium mixed alloy. So titanium mixed alloy means they are not actually
මොකද නිදාගත්තද ඈ?
ඊරේ මම දැක්කම ගේම් එකේ නරිත්
ගේම
එකක් දැම්ම
උඹ ඒ වෙලේම මං ගේමට ගියා විතරයි හරිද? කොල්ලෝ එන්නේ මැසේජ් එකක් දැම්ම මැච් එකට දෙට්ටමු කියලා. ඒකයි මං මේක ඇක්සෙප්ට් කරේ නැත්තේ. ඒ වෙලේම
මං ඉන්දියාවේ ගුරුත් අයින් වෙලා මුත් එක ගහන්න
අද
ප්‍රේමරත්න
ඒ අරුන් දෙන්න ඒ වෙලේමයි මං ගියේ ගේම් එකට.
ප්‍රේමරත්න
WhatsApp එකේ මැසේජ් එකක් දැම්මා. වරෙන් කියලා. මාත් වැල්රි කර ඒ වෙලේ.
ප්‍රේමරත්න can someone please inform Premaratna to switch off his mic? Can't switch off his mic for some reason.
hello bikuna.
Yeah. So workshop manuals are important. Yes, where was I? Yes, let's say for example 0.35, the valve is actually made of titanium alloy. The titanium is not actually expanding as much as in the normal chromoly alloy valve. So there's a difference. So you don't have to actually keep to 0.35, which means if you keep 0.35, the valve is actually open a little bit later, right? If you keep it 0.35 gap, that means valve is opening a little bit later, which end up uh, reducing the engine's performance, and in addition to that, it will actually create a lot of noise. Okay, so yeah. So the image shown actually next to this, or the discussion part, is actually a page from workshop manual. I'm not exactly sure whether you have seen a workshop manual. So workshop manual is very much different from the your typical owner's manual. Owner's manual is just giving you a very brief introduction and very brief details about the vehicle specifications sort of things and what can be done to fix issues sort of things. But here workshop manual is a very comprehensive set of instructions where each and every components is actually properly explained, which to done, what has to be done and everything. But here the problem here is actually not actually a problem. These the instruction here was actually given for OEM and specifications, or the manufacturers specifications for a general use, not for any performance build or anything, just for general use. So there's a question here also, why nuts and bolts have specified fastening torque values with them, and what are the purpose of this sequence. I expect you to actually find the answer for that. I'm not going to give you the answer for this question as well, especially since I actually discussed all the previous questions. Yeah, so using workshop manual is not something you have to be ashamed of. It's actually a very good thing. I actually suggest you to use the workshop manuals as much as possible, even though they are not very commonly available or readily available details. But I suggest you to use it, and I can give you some workshop manuals. I also have some workshop manuals, and I can actually hand over. I can actually share with you guys also with those. I can actually share them with you. So if you are interested, you can go through it. So workshop manual. The reason I'm especially emphasizing on this, I have seen most of the workshops the mechanics, they actually give like very they talk very highly of themselves about doing all of the building part without the workshop manuals. I'm pretty sure they are very talented and all, but the engine is actually, or the engines, or any component factory matter, any component is actually built by a person is even more qualified than him or her, right? So because of that, it's always good to follow their advice, at least to refer their advice, just to get an idea. So there's so many details you can actually get from these things. So I actually highly suggest to you to use them. So there are two workshop manuals. As I told you, it's not readily available. You have to actually purchase it from the manufacturer itself, or you can actually purchase it from private workshop manual printers are also there. Haynes is a one of the like well-known printer, such like manufacturer. Sorry, workshop book printer. But difference between Haynes manual and a normal workshop, or the uh, or the Haynes manual and a mm, manufacturer's workshop manual is a person has to be very technically inclined to use a workshop manual produced by a manufacturer. But in a Haynes manual, it's very detailed, color photographs and everything, so anyone can use it. There's a fair bit of a description and explanation why this part has to be done this way, how to do it and everything. But as I told you earlier, in a as I showed you earlier, workshop such like this, workshop manual such like this, it's only contain uh, very technical explanation, right? So you once you come to the faculty, I will show you the difference between two workshop manuals. I actually have both of them. I usually keep this in the workshop itself, so you guys to see. So my workshop manuals are over there, so you can actually see them. So the Highness manual is also there, so go ahead, go. I hope you can actually go through them. uh, Workshop manuals, as I told you, expensive, but the cheap way to do this is actually using something like a online workshop manual website, which are actually having a subscription free, which charge you a subscription fee, and use that. You can actually read, or you can actually online, you can use them workshop, but most of the time you can't download them. But online you can actually refer them, where they are very cheap, and downloading, if you buy a membership, there are some websites that actually allow you to download them as well. So yeah, so subscribing to something like this is very useful for you to get to know and how to work on a particular car. Yeah, so with that, we actually finished the um, whole section related to automobile engine. So now only thing you guys have to do is come to the workshop or come to the lab as soon as this whole thing clear up, and disassemble and assemble the engines. Yeah, until then we will actually discuss about the uh, gearboxes. So our next section is actually gearbox. I don't know whether you guys can see this. Okay, now you guys can see it, right? Yeah. So next part is actually workshop automobile gearboxes. Gearboxes. There's few types of gearboxes are available. We'll just go through them first, and we'll go into the assembly and disassembling, inspection, testing sort of details. Okay, so in automotive gearbox part, we will be discussing about the gearbox types, removing the gearbox from the vehicle, dismantling of the gearbox, cleaning and inspection, assembling of the gearbox. Yeah, I should change the photo here. It's just still the engine, so I should change the picture here. So these are the parts we will be actually should be discussing. So today we'll be discussing basically up to the third